Welcome to the book of Shmuel, Alef, chapter 25, Perek Chaf Hey, where we have the unfortunate story of Naval HaKarmeli. But before we go into that main story, there's a piece of information that comes in with one pasuk, but is still so important, and that is that Shmuel dies. Shmuel dies in the beginning of this chapter. The rabbis say he was 52 years old, and that it says that he's buried where he lived in Ramah. All right. On to the next story, the story of Naval HaKarmeli. There's a very successful businessman, entrepreneur, owner of many, many things. His name is Naval, and he lives in the Carmel. You ever go see near Haifa in Israel is north? There's a beautiful mountain called Carmel. So Carmel is where Naval lives. He has 3,000 sheep, he has 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And a lot of the money that he makes is by shearing the sheep for their wool, and that wool is sold on to make clothing, etc. Now, his name is Naval. I hate to say this, but Naval is not a nice word. His name is Naval, which means like a bad person, a scum, really terrible stuff. But his wife's name is Avigail, and she is beautiful and smart and good and everything. But the pasuk says, it's actually a terrible thing to say. The pasuk says that he is like his name, meaning his name is Naval, which is a bad guy, and indeed, just like his name indicates, he is a bad guy. So David hears that Naval is about to shear his sheep, aka make lots of cash, make lots of money. Now, David tells his people, remember this guy Naval, when he was taking his sheep all over to graze, to eat food, we always protected them, we were kind to them, we helped them. And now, please go to him and say, look. Now remember, David has like a few thousand people in his militia. And so he says, I hear you're making a lot of money, and we've done a lot of good for you. We've helped you a lot when you were shepherding, and we wouldn't mind if you can help us out as well. Like, we've helped you when you took care of your sheep, we made sure you're safe, etc. And I'd wish you can help us too. Now, I know a lot of people watching this are thinking, that's protection. It's like mob-style protection charging, where the mafia is like, oh, you got to pay us to protect you. In a way, it does sound like that, but on the other hand, it does say that David and his people really did help Naval beforehand. So they come to Naval and they're like, hey, help us out. We've done so much for you. But Naval starts deriding them and speaking to them very not nicely. He's like, what? Look how many slaves today speak out even though they shouldn't. Look at David. He's just a rebellious slave of Shaul, and how dare him make demands. Who is he? He goes on and on and on. And give you a tip for life. Never say mean things to a guy with a militia of 1,000 people who are pretty hungry. And so Naval is like, why should I give David, that slave, that whatever, he calls him all kinds of names, why should I give him anything? And I'm not going to take my hard-earned money, and I'm not going to give it to you. So David hears that, and he says, all right. David's like, okay, we're going to go and get back at this guy. So David takes his sword, and he takes 400 people with their swords to go attack Naval, and 200 people sitting on to take care of whatever animals they have, whatever equipment they have. So that's a total of 600 people, 400 coming with David to fight Naval, and 200 staying back. Now, Avigail hears from one of the servants that that's what her husband did. She hears that her husband spoke so meanly to David, and she's like, I'm going to get back at him. And so the servant tells Avigail, the wife of Naval, he's like, hey, actually, these guys of David actually did help us. We do owe them a favor. And now your husband just told them off and spoke really meanly to them. Now, Avigail is trying to diffuse the situation. She knows that they owe David and his people a favor, and she knows that her husband spoke really not nicely to David's people. So she quickly takes 200 loaves of bread. She takes 2 big jugs of wine. She takes 5 prepared sheep and 5, basically lots of wheat, lots of grains, lots of raisins, lots of figs. Anyhow, she gets a huge amount of food. Lots of bread, lots of raisins, lots of figs and wine and meat. And she says, pile these up on the donkeys and let me go quickly appease David so he doesn't get angry at us. So he tells them, he's like, okay, I'm going to go, but she does not tell her husband Naval where she's about to go. Anyhow, as she's coming down of the mountain of Carmel with this whole entourage of people with food and bread ready for David, who does she see if not David? And David is like, oh, I'm sorry, but like we actually did a lot for your husband, and then he's doing nothing for us. This is not okay. It's not acceptable. And David is telling her, actually, I'm on my way to destroy Naval and everything that he has. So it's good you came here. And so Abigail quickly bows down. She's like, I am so sorry. She diffuses the situation. She says, don't worry, my husband, his name is Naval, which means a bad guy, and he actually is a bad guy. But thank God that I was able to diffuse this situation, she tells David. She's like, I'm happy that this didn't escalate. May God protect you. May God be with you, she tells David. Here's all this food that I brought you guys. I'm sorry my husband is such a jerk. And here I am helping you guys. And may Hashem always be with you. And one day, you'll be king. And just thank God that you didn't end up killing us because we're innocent. The only bad guy here is Naval. And David says to Abigail, thank God that you helped diffuse the situation. And you caused me not to go and kill Naval and everyone that's with him. And so they separate, and David takes all the food. And meanwhile, where's Naval in all this? So she comes home and she sees Naval drunk, completely drunk. Ouch, that's horrible. And it says shikor ad me'od, very drunk. He's drunk and he doesn't know anything. In the morning, as Naval is sobering up from his wine, his wife comes to him and she says, hey, last night, when you were like getting drunk, I took tons and tons of food. I went to David, I gave him the food, and I gave it to him and his people. Naval hears that. He's so mad and angry and shocked that he has a stroke. And for 10 days, he's very sick. And then after 10 days, he dies. And David hears and he's like, thank God that this guy who was so mean to us is gone. And surprise, there's a romantic twist here, because David says, hey, maybe I can marry Abigail, the wife of Naval, and because now Naval passed away, he died, and so David marries Abigail. And they go and they ask Abigail, are you willing to marry David? She says yes, and she becomes David's wife. And then David also marries a woman named Achinoam HaYisraelit, Achinoam from Israel. But remember, David is technically still married to Michal, the wife of David, the daughter of Shaul. So whatever happens to Michal, or what happened to Michal, for that you'll have to wait till Perek Chaf Vav to see what happens between David and Michal. So what did we have in this chapter, Perek Chaf Hey? We had Shmuel die and him buried. We had Naval HaKarmeli, whose name means he's not a good guy. We have David asking Naval when he's shearing his sheep. David's guys asking for some food, sustenance. They're like, we helped you so much. Naval curses them out, curses David. He's like, get out of here, I owe you nothing. David is like, oh yeah, I'm going to destroy him and everything that he has. Abigail hears that Naval told off David, and she's like, oh, bad idea. They actually helped us a lot. She packs 10 donkeys filled with bread, meat, all kinds of stuff. She goes to David, she meets him. She says, look, I'm sorry about this. My husband's a jerk. And I know you guys helped us. Here's all this food, and may God bless you, because you're going to become the next king of Israel. She comes back home. She tells Naval what happened. He's so upset that his wife gave that food to David. He has a stroke. For 10 days, he's sick. After 10 days, he dies. When David hears that Naval died, he asks Abigail if she'll marry him, and she says yes. They get married, and David marries Abigail and Achinoam HaYisraelit, Achinoam from Israel. And that is Perek Chaf Hey. Thank you for listening.